Hi, my name is Meadow Kalfeld. I'm a wildlife biologist, instructor at Itasca Community College in the Natural Resources Department here in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And today we're going to discuss aging deer using jaws, or the tooth wear of deer. Now, the first thing I want to say is that this is not an exact science. One of the things you have to take in consideration are that there are individuals, right? You and I, we have different teeth. My teeth maybe decay or break or wear down at a different rate than your teeth would. So there's individual variation. Then there is environmental variation. So we know that deer in certain captive environments, their teeth wear at a certain rate, right? We have known ages for these animals because they were in captive populations. We also use Cementum annuli, which I'll get into later, for a way to kind of confirm or disconfirm or disprove the age of deer, and that's using the growth wings on teeth, much like trees have. So I've got a bunch of these jaw sets that I've developed here in northern Minnesota, and we'll look at some of these. But I want you to keep in mind that, again, this is not an exact science. It's not entirely accurate. In fact, after 5.5 years, it becomes very difficult. And usually it's a good idea to use this for aging an animal as a fawn, 1.5 years old, maybe 2.5 to 5.5, and then over 5.5-year-old deer. So otherwise it can be a little tricky and subjective, like many things when it comes to aging, wear, same thing with grouse wings, as you've come to find. So we'll go ahead and get at it. Thank you. All right. We have the set of deer jaws. I've ordered them by age. Remember that deer aging is subjective, meaning that there are a lot of personal bias through experience or opinion or perception of where that goes into this. Recall that I mentioned you should only use deer aging by jaws for a rough estimate. If you want to be more accurate, you can go ahead and send in Cementum annuli, which we'll discuss later. First jaw here is a fawn's jaw. The first thing you'll notice about fawns is that they have 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth. When they're adults, they'll be fully erupted to 6 teeth. You can see back here, there's one of those molars erupting, and then this gap farther back actually is another molar erupting. Those come out obviously by the 2.5 years old. So 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth. The third premolar is tricuspid as a fawn. It's also referred to as the milk tooth. This is 1.5 years old jaw here. You can see that the final molar, the 6th molar, is erupting here in this 1.5 years old deer. The first thing that we notice about 1.5 years old deer is that 1, 2, 3, this third premolar, because these are the molars, there's 6 teeth total in adult deer, is tricuspid, so it's 1, 2, 3 cusps. In this particular individual, we don't see it erupting like we do some of these other jaws. I'm looking for an example here. In the case of this one here, we can see that underneath that tricuspid molar is another molar coming up. They're going to lose that tricuspid molar. But the dead giveaway for 1.5 years old deer is that it has this tricuspid third premolar, and that one will be lost between 1.5 years and 2.5 years old. So when you see tricuspid, we go 1.5 years. Here's a 2.5-year-old deer jaw, and we can see that we have a bicuspid molar and 1, 2, 3 bicuspid premolar. Apologies. And so we know that this deer is over 1.5 years old at that age. Then it boils down to tooth wear from this point on. It's not based off of eruption or replacement. So we know that this is at least 1.5 years old deer because we have a bicuspid third premolar. And then we can look at things like tooth wear. And with tooth number 3, remember said that bicuspid molar is replaced by, or the tricuspid is replaced by a 2-cusp molar or premolar, and on the lingual crest, which is the side of the tongue, this is where the tongue would be, where this hand is, they all have strong ridges of dentin and enamel, and they're all pointed. And in tooth number 4, we see that the enamel is just as wide as the dentin, so the white is as wide as the brown. And in this case, the back cusp is still sharp. So this is the back cusp. that is an important one there for looking at deer age and wear. Here we have an approximately 3.5-year-old deer jaw, or deer, jaw of a 3.5-year-old deer. Here we see that on tooth number 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, the dentine is wider than the enamel. And when we look at the back cusp, we notice that it is beginning to wear or flatten out or be worn conically. So, 3.5 years old. Now we're starting to get to where things get a little more subjective. This is an approximately 4.5-year-old deer. And we see that on number 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, the dentine, or the dark part, is 2.5 or 2 times wider than the enamel. And so this is dental pooling, we call this. The dentine is softer than the enamel, so it begins to pool out or cup out as it wears faster than the enamel. This is in part how it helps keep these teeth sharp, so that they have sharp occlusal or crushing surfaces or grinding surfaces to reduce the size of vegetation, so it's easier for deer to digest. They are ruminants. And, you know, it's one of those things that's interesting to watch in other species like rodents when it comes to keeping their teeth sharp. So, 4.5 years old, the back cusp, or the last cusp, is beginning to wear and sloping downward towards the cheek. Remember that this is the tongue side, this is the cheek side, and we can see here's that back cusp, and this, if you look closely, sloping towards the cheek side. All right, and so this is our next deer, or next age class up, maybe 5.5 or so. We look at 1, 2, 3 bicuspid premolar, right? So it means it's over 1.5 years old. Tooth number 4, we see that the dentine is twice as wide as the enamel, still. And then tooth number 4, we also see that the small enamel ridge present in the center of the tooth. So there's a little bit of enamel ridge still there in the middle of the tooth. And then 5, the dentine begins to be twice as white as the enamel. So we can see the enamel, again, the white spot, or the white stuff on the outside, and the dentine, the dark stuff in the inside of the tooth, or the pooling part, is beginning to get wider. So twice as white as that enamel on the outside. All right, so it's approximately 5.5 years old. So this is our next deer. Note that we're missing the first premolar here. Sometimes that happens in preparation, so just take note of that. You can see that there are 2 holes there. That would be for the roots. There's a double root of that premolar there. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, we see bicuspid, again, more than 1.5 years old, because we have a bicuspid instead of a tricuspid molar. We see that the dental pulling on number 4 is twice as wide as enamel, so it classifies it greater than 3.5. And then 4, number again, is the small enamel ridge present on center of tooth, so it's still slightly there. It's not completely worn out. Remember that this first molar, or the 4th tooth, is the oldest tooth in the head. It's the one that's common with fawns. And so this one has typically the most amount of wear. And then number 5, or tooth 5, we see that the dentine is twice as wide as enamel, which makes it over 4.5, right? And then after that, number 6, we see that the dentine is wider than the enamel on number 6. So we're looking at the wear as it goes back in the mouth, this being the youngest tooth in the head at this time. And now we got an older deer, and again, I'm not going to, beyond 5.5 is typically questionable, shouldn't necessarily be exact science or used as exact science, but this is an estimation. So this deer is greater than 5.5 years old. We see that tooth number 4, this is number 4, right? The oldest tooth in the head is worn smooth. There's no longer a little dental ridge or an enamel ridge there in the middle of that dentine. It's just a flat pool. And then we see that on number 5 that there's still a little bit of an enamel ridge there in the middle of the tooth, and on number 6 a small enamel ridge is present on the center of the tooth. I have some older deer here, but this is a pretty old animal, and in Minnesota tends to be that the does don't live, or live longer than the bucks. Bucks tend to not live very long because of increased hunting pressure. But this is an example of an older deer, maybe 7.5 or older, and again, worn smooth. These deer, at this point, is better, if you really want to know the exact age of this animal, to send in for Cementum annuli. And again, if you don't recall from the presentation, cementum annuli is basically an annular deposition, or every year the tooth puts down a layer of cementum. And that layer of cementum looks like the ring on a tree when you cut it and look at it under a microscope after staining it. And for each year that animal lives in a temperate region or a seasonal region like northern climes in North America, that animal's tooth will accumulate a layer of cementum. And so cementum annuli can be, pretty successful in northern climes. There are some questions as to its accuracy as well, but I would argue that it's better than looking at tooth wear because, again, this is quite subjective. So there is the summary and what you should be looking for when it comes to aging deer using their teeth. And remember that individuals, as well as their environments and life events, have a huge impact on what these teeth end up looking like. So again, not exact science, but an interesting skill to have.